What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so Batman Lost from Dark Knight's Metal is probably one of the best stories in Dark Knight's Metal. It is absolutely amazing because it's almost like this love letter from like Snyder and James Tynion and all these guys to the Batman mythos, because we basically see a lot of these things that have happened over the course of Batman's history thrown into the story. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that, remember, this is basically just Batman in the Dark Multiverse. That's all this is. But this is super cool because this story reminds me of the episode from Outer Limits. I don't know how many of you guys ever saw that, but it was a super cool episode. Now, we'll talk about that once we get to the end of the video, but the cool thing about this is that for those of you guys who are just now joining us, remember, all we really knew was that for some reason or another, Batman was the vessel, the means by which Barbados would come into the main DC universe, and that was it. I mean, of course, a lot of that stuff's still being fleshed out. This gives us a lot of the answers to the questions that we've been asking. But the funny thing is that once we get to the end, it'll basically say, are these true or are they false? Are they real answers or are they fake answers? And that's what's so cool about all this. So the funny thing is that with Batman having been transported to the Dark Multiverse when Barbados and his forces entered, again, that was the nature of it. It was the idea Batman would be the vessel, he would go to the Dark Multiverse, and Barbados and the Dark Knights would come to the positive DC multiverse, basically to Earth Zero. And so this picks up with that whole scenario, but crazily enough, it picks up with Bruce Wayne when he's 78 years old. And that's the crazy thing about this, is because it's like his granddaughter sitting on his lap, right? You know, and she's like, hey, tell me another story. I want a real story, something that actually happened. And it's kind of funny here because what Bruce Wayne does, or at least what his granddaughter does, is pull down a book, or at least one of the cases that Batman went over, called The Case of the Chemical Syndicate. Now, this is really awesome for a couple reasons. The first is because of the fact that one of the things that Bruce Wayne says here, and one of the things that DC's saying basically, is that all the stories that we've ever read about Batman actually happened. They might contradict each other, but they all happened. The other half is that The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, that was the first story Batman ever appeared in Detective Comics number 27 back in 1939. That was his first story. Now, the funny thing is that they start from the beginning, right? Like Batman starts the beginning of the story, you know, and says, well, I mean, I was picking up with this guy, I was meeting with, Lambert Jr., because of the fact that he'd been framed for his father's murder. But right off the bat, if you ever read Detective Comics number 27, right off the bat, this is not the way it went. That's not the way the story opened. The story opened with Commissioner Gordon running over the events of the entire story with Bruce Wayne. Commissioner Gordon didn't know Bruce Wayne was Batman, and the reader didn't know Bruce Wayne was Batman until the end of the original story. But in this scenario, Bruce basically tracks down Lambert Jr., the son of a guy named Lambert. In the original stories, we were never given his first name. His son was the one who was framed for his murder, and Batman's immediate response is, well, I know it wasn't you. I mean, you were the one who basically picked the knife out of your father's body. That's why your fingerprints were on it. But in the original Detective Comics number 27 story, Lambert Jr. was picked up by the cops, and he was basically questioned by the cops, and that's where this all came in. And that's why it's cool, because then he starts saying things like, well, there's always blood on this window. There's always birds that are crashing into it because the way the window's angled, the birds can't see that there's window panes there. But right off the bat, Bruce Wayne basically says, this isn't right. This is not how this story unfolded, because it's not. It's not the way the original Detective Comics number 27 story unfolded. And that's important to remember here, because what's going to happen is that as we go through this, all these moments in Batman's history are going to crop up, but none of them are going to be the way they originally were. The next thing that ends up happening here is we basically jump to Grant Morrison's Batman, The Return of Bruce Wayne. Now, the cool thing about this is that when it came to The Return of Bruce Wayne, this was the storyline that followed the events of Final Crisis, where Darkseid's Omega Sanction killed every single person that was ever hit with it. With Bruce Wayne, it sent him back in time because, DC can't kill his character off. He sells too many comics. So as a result, he was basically time displaced. He was sent into the distant past. And what The Return of Bruce Wayne did was basically chronicle Bruce Wayne from the very distant past all the way up until the point when he was finally discovered by the Justice League and brought back to the modern day. But what this does is it basically grabs all the concepts of Dark Knight's Metal and rolls them into this whole thing. Remember, with regards to Barbados, all we knew was that he had walked the earth somewhere along the line, and he had been defeated by Hawkman, and that was really about it. We didn't really know anything about it. What we end up finding out is that much like Grant Morrison established, when Batman was transported back to the distant past, he began basically drawing bat symbols on walls to remind himself of who he was. The problem with this is that the bat is the symbol of Barbados. Bruce Wayne didn't know this. All he knew was that he was just trying to remind himself of who he was. But by drawing this bat symbol on a wall, it basically led to the formation of the Tribe of the Bat, i.e. these people who lived in the main DC universe and effectively allied themselves with Barbados never knowing that they were actually doing that. And that's why this is important, is because when Hathset basically became the leader of this bat tribe and went to war against the bird tribe, that what this meant was that it allowed Barbados an opening of sorts, in the sense that Barbados basically seemed to grab nth metal, throw it to Hathset and say, here's your weapon to defeat the bird tribe. In turn, Hathset used that against the bird tribe, Carter Hall. In the process, Carter Hall was basically killed and then began going through this whole process of death and resurrection at Hawkman. But all this stems back to the actions of Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne was sent to the distant past by Darkseid. Bruce Wayne drew a bat symbol. Bruce Wayne inspired the formation of the Bat Tribe. Because of the fact that Bruce Wayne was sent to the distant past, Barbados saw Bruce Wayne for the first time and just watched him, just started watching things unfold. And when people began swearing allegiance to the Bat Tribe, which was basically just something that kind of came into existence because of Bruce Wayne's cave drawings, Barbados came to the realization he could use that as a means to have that tribe follow his belief system and then use that tribe to bring himself into the main DC universe. That's the crazy thing about all this, is because he's basically the one that set all this stuff in motion. The problem is that, again, somewhere along the line, Barbados managed to make his way into the actual DC universe. He was defeated by the bird tribe after Hathset was defeated, and he was confined back. And that's when Barbados came to realize that it's not enough for people to just worship him and him to step into their realm. What he needs is an anchor. He needs someone who sort of represents this kind of ethereal connection, some sort of intangible connection that hasn't been explained yet, that can basically be a quote-unquote vessel for him that will allow him to step into the main DC universe, so long as that person goes into the Dark Multiverse. And that's the nature of Bruce Wayne. Now, how it is that we got from point A to point B, that's what's explained here. All these moments really just sort of pick up Damian Wayne from Batman in Bethlehem, the future version of Damian Wayne who's just cold-blooded, the newest version of Batman, all these different versions basically just start kind of cropping up. But it's these perverted iterations, these stories that DC's written over the years that are twisted, that are screwed up, that are not the way that they're supposed to be. Even with the character of Thomas Wayne, as far as Bruce Wayne's concerned, Thomas Wayne is this sort of upstanding guy. He's his father. He's the man that always did the right thing. And a lot of the moral viewpoints that Bruce Wayne has, he got from his father. What seems to happen here is that as he's sort of just jumping through all these different points in his life, past and present, and even a life that he never lived, he basically sort of picks up as Thomas Wayne, only to find out that Thomas Wayne was part of the Bat Tribe. And Thomas Wayne was one of the people who served the purpose of trying to bring Barbados into the main DC universe. Now, where the other members of the Bat Tribe aren't really ready for that kind of an act to basically condemn this girl to death, Thomas Wayne seems like he is, and he immediately goes to sort of turn the knife on this girl. Now, of course, all the other guys run out, and everything begins to go crazy and the place starts burning down, but then this girl seems to suddenly transform into Catwoman, or at the very least looks like Selina Kyle, and basically begins describing exactly how everything played out the way it originally took place, in the sense that, well, she's basically locked inside this room, she'll eventually burn alive, and that will be it. The purpose of this tribe will be to bring Barbados into the DC universe, only to find out they can't. After that, he's immediately sent to another place in time where the Joker has become mayor. Now, this seems to hit at the idea of like Batman Endgame. During Scott Snyder's run in Batman Endgame, the Joker basically exposed the entire city of Gotham to the Joker toxin, and everybody went crazy. But then suddenly it flips on its head. And what we end up finding out is that in this particular universe that exists out there, that people got tired of superheroes, and instead they allied themselves with the bad guys. The average person going to their 9-to-5 job, the average mom, the average dad, they got tired of everything Batman stood for and chose the Joker. They chose all the villains. The villains took this opportunity to rise up to prominence and basically conquer the world, tracking down every single superhero they could find and basically killing them. At this point, it immediately jumps again, and we pick up with Allan Wayne. And this one, Allan Wayne is kind of like this perversion of the way his character was originally depicted. Remember, in Scott Snyder's run of Batman, Allan Wayne was established as the guy who had basically gone through and spearheaded the elevation of Gotham from being just this sort of small town into being this massive metropolitan area. He started all these different foundations, but Allan Wayne was the first one to realize the Court of Owls was real, this clandestine organization that lived within Gotham City that was composed of the rich and powerful people who were trying to basically control the city itself. With regards to this, in terms of how it compares to Dark Knight's Metal, we're not given an explanation of that. We're kind of left to believe that Allan Wayne figured out that the Court of Owls, because they serve the purpose of ensuring that some future person of the Wayne Wayne family would basically be exposed to all these metals, which would turn him into a vessel that could lead to Barbados' return, where Allan Wayne seems to be the one to realize that all these different buildings have been basically composed or been doused with these, particular metals that the Court of Owl use, with nth metal more or less, that he's immediately killed by a talent. And then it picks up with him running through the street. In Scott Snyder's run, it didn't play out that way. In Scott Snyder's run, it was basically just Allan Wayne being the guy to figure out that the Court of Owls existed. He had no idea what they were about, but he knew that they had sinister plans. He ran through the street, screaming like a lunatic, came across some cops. Some cops said, "Hey man, hold on for a second." Then he was yanked into a sewer by the Talon, the assassin of the Court of Owls, and that was it. But it's basically grabbing these ideas and it's rolling them in, giving us alternate reality depictions of these characters. And so then we end up jumping back to the original case of the Chemical Syndicate, and it's basically Batman realizing the significance of these birds, that he surrounds himself with birds in order to always remember who he is. And this is where the symbolism begins to come into play when we end up seeing Superman and Nightwing. And so the implication here means one of two things. Either it means people who can fly, it means Robins, or it means both. And so because of that, it's basically Batman surrounding himself with people who are tried and true, so that Batman can always basically maintain this ideology that sometimes he does what they wouldn't do, that he's got a heavier hand, that he may stumble, he may fall, and there's a possibility he might lose his way. But in order to make sure he doesn't, he anchors himself to people who in a lot of ways are morally greater than he is. And that's why this is so cool. But it's also the idea with regards to these birds, is Batman kind of saying, hey, look, birds are attracted to like strange metals, different things like that. If the birds are flying into this window, they're heading for something in particular, which means had they gone through this window, where would they have landed? And that's what leads him to this trap door. Well, then switching back to him as an old man telling this story, suddenly it's, his granddaughter freaking out and acting all, demonic. But it's also because of the fact that this 78-year-old Bruce Wayne also knows that something's not right here. That all these moments, quote unquote, in his life, all these experiences that he's gone through, all these stories that he's told, all this history that he's aware of happened a way that he remembers. But the way that he's recounting it to his granddaughter, it never happened that way. It's all wrong somehow. And that's the idea of Barbados popping up. This is where we start to get into all these different questions and all these different answers, and the question of whether or not any of them are legit. What Barbados basically says is your life is the way it is because I made it that way, because I've made you the person that you are. Every single circumstance that you've gone through in your life, every case you've solved, every clue that's been there, I've been there to make sure that you turn out that way. And he even goes as far as to display the entire Dark Multiverse. He says, look, my Dark Knights represent a handful of them. The stories that you've jumped through, these alternate reality events that have taken place where things have been darker, they've been more screwed up, that's only a handful. You've seen at most maybe a little less than a dozen, but there are thousands of these worlds where everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. And I have the power to grab these worlds and bring them in to the main DC universe, to bring everything you know and love crashing down around you. And that's when he starts showing him all the Dark Knights who are taking out the superheroes. Flash facing off against Red Death in this alternate story. Batman becomes a god of war. All the origin stories that we've seen so far, that's all of them that are here. And it's him saying, I have all these universes where everyone you know and everyone you love is dead because of you. You killed them. You destroyed each and every one of these universes. And that hits home at the nature of this comic. And it hits home at Batman's absolute greatest fear. The fact that he will fail, that he'll lose everything he loves because he'll inevitably screw up. It's Batman feeling a sense of hopelessness. But that's where the question suddenly gets yanked away, because where we feel like we finally have an answer to this, where we feel like we finally have an origin to who it is that Barbados is, we suddenly yank back to the beginning of the comic and the cycle repeats itself. And that's why this is so cool, because again, this reminds me of the whole Tempest story. If you guys never saw that episode from the Outer Limits, it was super cool. It's like this captain of a ship is basically trying to get back to his home colony on some other planet after having arrived on Earth to get a cure for some illness called alias, which causes hallucinations. Along the way, they fly through like a gravity well or something along those lines, but they end up on like some weird derelict planet where like they get stuck inside some living being or something like that. Their ship is swallowed or something along those lines. But when they go to investigate what it is, the captain's bit by like one of these weird spiders, and then suddenly there's like two alternate scenarios that are taking place. He's hallucinating events. In one event, he successfully made it back and he saved the people on his colony, but he's suffering the effects of alias, where he's basically experiencing hallucinations. In the other event, he's still on the ship and he's experiencing hallucinations because of the spider bite. But with regards to both stories, in the story where he made it back to his own world, where he made it back to his own colony, they say, well, the images you're seeing, the story that you're seeing about you experiencing the spider bite and suffering hallucinations, that's a hallucination. But when he's on the ship, they say, well, the spider bite's giving you a hallucination that you made it back to your colony. At the end of the episode, you find out neither one of those stories is true, that instead he was bitten by one of the spiders and he's basically living a series of hallucinations, and so is everybody else on the ship. And they're basically just being consumed alive by these spiders, and they're stuck in an endless loop of hallucinations. But that's what this reminds me of, is because it's basically Batman stuck inside the Dark Multiverse. He's locked in a dream. It's almost Matrix-esque in terms of how it unfolds. There's no legitimate escape here for him. And what he's experiencing are all these terrible scenarios in his subconscious. And that's why I say, we don't know if Barbados appearing to him and saying there's thousands of all these worlds that have these terrible scenarios, we don't know if that's true. That's the cool thing about this, is that for every answer that we're given, we're basically asked the question, is this answer true or is this answer false? And I'm not going to tell you which. With that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.